Pastor Stephen Smith. I'm with Christian Leadership Partners. We provide leadership solutions for both profit and nonprofit organizations through coaching, teaching, and mentoring. You can take a look at our website, christianleadershippartners.org, and see that we actually provide a lot of resources that may be valuable to you and your organization. I encourage you to take a look at some of those things. And while you're there, take a look at some of the projects that we're doing here in Panama. We're helping churches to build, to feed, to disciple, and also to go out and to create entrepreneurs. So hopefully you can participate in that as well. And I'll tell you at the end how you can actually do that. What we're doing is we're providing you with a free 30-day session of leadership, looking at the leadership of the kings of Israel. What we're doing is we're going through the Bible in 1st and 2nd Kings and 1st and 2nd Chronicles and looking at the different ways the different leaders led. And if we can do that and apply that to our own situations, then we'll find that we can actually succeed in a lot of areas where maybe we failed in the past. So let's take a look at this study. I think that it'll make a huge difference for you. Now, before we get started, we want to take a look at the value of actually looking at these leadership of the kings. What they do is they actually give us a picture of true leadership and what right and wrong ways of leading can actually produce in our lives. We can also take a look at it and recognize that we have a historical record of their successes and their failures. What that does is it gives us a before, during, and after picture of what leadership is and how they applied it, and then we can actually see the results of what it is that they did. The third thing is that we want to take these opportunities to be able to look and see if there are glimpses of servant leadership in this. And the reason why is because Jesus Christ used servant leadership as his main model of leadership, and Robert Greenleaf wrote to us a lot about that. And if I can understand the different principles that run contrary to that and take those out of our lives and put into our lives the good attributes of servant leadership, then maybe we can succeed where we've maybe not succeeded in the past. So we've taken these 30 days and we've looked at different opportunities. And yesterday we looked at Jeroboam, who was the leader who took the nations up to the north. He reigned for almost 30 years. And during his time, we also see other kings rising to power down in the south. So Rehoboam had sons, and in fact, his son Abijah was the next one in line, and he actually became king. He was only king for 3 years, so there's not that much that we can look at, but we can see that he started out really quite bad. He picked up where his father Rehoboam had actually left off. This is 1 Kings 15:3. It says he committed the same sins as his father before him, and he was not as faithful to the Lord his God as his ancestor David had been. David was his great-grandfather, and all he had to do was look back and read the record and see how he could actually change the way that his father had done things. And he saw the failures of his father, but he didn't apply those to his own life. What leaders above you have you looked at in the past and seen that they failed, and yet you're doing the same thing? What we want to do is we want to be able to identify the negative attributes of things that we've seen in our past and not apply those to our lives, but rather do the different thing, even if it means it's difficult, and make that difference in our organizations. I think that if we start doing that, we're actually going to start seeing the changes that we want to see and the successes that we need to accomplish. So what ends up happening is that he goes to war with Jeroboam in the north. And so Abijah goes up and he stands up on a mountaintop and he makes this statement, which is actually one of his redeeming qualities. This is 2 Chronicles 13:8. He says, "Do you really think you can stand against the kingdom of the Lord that is led by the descendants of David? You have a vast army and you have those gold calves that Jeroboam made as your gods." He was taunting them, and yet he was able to stand up and say, "I'm relying on the Lord our God." And in this case, God allowed this battle to happen. He was outnumbered 8-6, or 4-3, I guess if you do the math right. But what happened is that they actually won, and it was because they turned to the Lord and they humbled themselves before the Lord, and he was actually successful because of that. He went back and he changed the way that he thought, and he started living life just a little bit differently. In fact, we'll actually see that Abijah did some things that his son was actually able to start using in his life and start making a difference in the kingdom itself. So we see a slight change in the kingdom here. And we can see that God had made a promise with David, and even during the life of Abijah, we see that there are some opportunities that God provides for him so that he can actually go back and start living his life the way that he should. We have to understand that regardless of what we've done in the past, we can actually set our sights on the proper way, we establish a vision, we establish the good goals that we want to fulfill as leaders, and we can actually move forward even though we've made mistakes in the past. You may have been fired from your last job. That doesn't mean that you're going to fail at your next job. You can change the way that you do things. You can follow the principles that we're teaching here. You can actually identify the things that will help you make you more successful. And when you start doing that, you're actually going to start seeing yourself becoming a better leader. 1 Kings 15:4 says, "But for David's sake, the Lord his God allowed his descendants to continue ruling, shining like a lamp, and he gave Abijah a son to rule after him in Jerusalem." Abijah had a son that God actually anointed to become a good king, to bring Judah back into line with the line of David, to help him to be that. And we'll see that Abijah's son was actually very good at what he did. He was actually a really good king. So even though Abijah only lasted for 3 years, we can see that his successes were complicated by his failures, so to speak, and his failures didn't really set him up for the successes that he needed, and yet he was able to turn his kingdom at the end and turn it over to his 12-year-old son. So we know that Abijah did not succeed in everything that he set his hands to, but we as leaders, we don't often succeed in everything that we do as well. But we don't want to allow that to hold us back. We know that this promise that Abijah was given was a Davidic covenant, and we can read in 2 Samuel 7:16 that this is the promise that David was given. "Your house and your kingdom will continue before me for all time, and your throne will be secure forever." So even though his descendants were a little bit worthless at times, God didn't rip the kingdom immediately out of their hands. He continually gave them opportunities to be able to call on the name of the Lord and see the results of that. Isaiah 9:6 gives us this picture of what true leadership really is. And what we want to do is we want to make sure that we can model this sort of leadership. It tells us, "For a child is born to us, a son is given to us. The government will rest on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, and Prince of Peace." There are 3 attributes there that we as leaders can actually apply. It doesn't mean that we're God, and it doesn't mean that we're trying to become God in our organizations. In fact, that's the last thing that we want to do. But we want to make sure that we are a good counselor, that we can sit down and we can listen to the things that the people are telling us. We want to make sure that we can understand what they're saying and provide them with the direction that they need to succeed in the task that we've given them. So if I'm a mighty counselor, then I know that I can do that. And if you're not a good counselor, this may be a skill that you might want to work on. We also see that Jesus Christ was called Mighty God and Everlasting Father. We want to make sure that if necessary, we can be the father or the mother in our organization where people can actually look up to us and they can say, "My dad can do anything. My father, my leader can make sure that I can succeed." They can come to us for advice. We're not going to rebuke them. We're not going to crucify them. We're not going to turn them into something that they're not. And then the last thing we want to make sure is that we're the Prince of Peace. If we lead in peace, then we know that our organizations are actually going to prosper in the peace that's there. In fact, that's what peace here means. It actually means shalom. So that's prosperity, that's favor, that's peace, but it's also wholeness and completeness. And if I can act as a leader that can fulfill the elements of shalom, then I know that I can actually succeed in all these things as well. How can I do that? Well, we can change the way that we think. Romans 12:2 tells us, "Don't copy the behaviors and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way that you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect." So what we have to do is we have to be a little bit like Abijah, and at the end, when we realize that we have some issues, then what we want to do is we want to start facing these issues. We want to change the way that we think and change the way that we lead, get rid of those negative habits and those bad things and start adopting the good things. And when we do that, then we can start succeeding as leaders. So Abijah's strength is that when it came right down to it, he relied on God. He even trained up his own son to be a better king in the nation of Judah. His failures were that he followed examples of bad leadership of his father, and that his leadership was cut short and he reigned only for 3 years. So what we want to do is we want to take these things, we want to make sure that we're not doing things that can actually destroy us. That means we want to identify what we're doing that's a bad habit, and then we also want to identify one thing that we can change the way that we lead that can actually help our organization to succeed today, right now. And if we do that, then we can become the leader that God always intended for us to be.